This segment we're going to talk a little bit about power steering on your C3. So what you're looking at here are the standard power steering hoses, the power steering ram that's currently on your C3, the power steering control valve, the pulley, the pump, and the gearbox. Here at Vette Brakes and Products, we remanufacture these components if you want to keep your car original. On this power steering ram, we actually cut away this section, put in a new shaft, re-weld it, pressure test it, and make sure that it works fine. Same applies for the power steering control valve. We simply completely revalve it, put all new seals in it, pressure test it, make sure that it's good for your car. But for those of you who want to cut above and you want to take it to the next level in steering, on our table here we have a rack and pinion system that fits your current C3. Chris, you want to tell us about it, please?
Sure, thank you, Paul. I've had the pleasure of installing a couple of these systems, and it is a radical departure from what you're used to on the standard third-generation Corvette steering system. This particular steering system uses a rack and pinion. It's actually a center steer rack and pinion system where your tie rods don't come out of each end of the rack. They're actually, the adjustment, the movement comes from the center. It bolts up to the factory frame using most of the original factory holes, in fact all the factory holes, and connects to your steering shaft right up here. It comes complete with all the hardware necessary to install it, including new power steering lines. And so these will attach to your standard power steering pump and convert your steering to very tight, very precise rack and pinion design. These will turn lock to lock. It's 3 turns total. So it's a good system, has a lot of performance orientation to it, and weight-wise, by the time you weigh all this compared to that equipment there, it's actually including your, which you no longer need this, it weighs less than your factory system. So it's an excellent application for a performance vehicle or just a daily driver that you want to convert to a power steering car.
Very good. So for those of you who want to stay original on your C3, come to Vette Brakes and Products where we manufacture all your power steering components for a C3 original, or you can upgrade to the high-performance rack and pinion system.
The mock-up that we're looking at right now is the frame of the vehicle, and you can imagine that this section right here is where the engine would be sitting. So the oil pan would be right here, and the front of the engine would be right here, and your exhaust system would be rolling down right here. So that gives you an idea of where we're looking. It's a unique perspective of the area, so we can get a better idea of where all these parts go. If I was rebuilding the steering system, the first thing I would start with is the steering gearbox. The steering gearbox sits right over here on the frame. It's held in by 3 bolts. There are 5/8 nuts that go on them. You have one here, and one down here, and one up on the frame here. On the outside of the frame, they have a cage nut type assembly, a carriage bolt type assembly, so they don't turn. You might have to hold your finger against them, and then you can unbolt this. That's how you would loosen your steering gearbox up. Also, your rag joint that comes from your steering shaft goes on right here, and you would loosen the bolt and loosen your rag joint from it. At this point in time, we are removing the stock steering system from the vehicle. Danny's been busy working on it. Right now, he's on the passenger side getting ready to drop the passenger tie rod in.
Chris, I've moved the outer tie rod from the right side. Now I'll come around here to the left side. We'll move the outer tie rod on this side.
Okay.
It takes a 5/8 wrench to fit this nut. All right, we use our trusty pickle fork. It took a 5/8 wrench to get the nut off. Now, obviously, we remove the cotter key first.
Okay. Now, what all have you removed from the passenger side at this point?
So far, just the outer tie rod and also the idler arm.
Okay, and what's involved in the idler arm removal?
Just 2 bolts on the frame. They're both a 9/16.
Okay, and that would still be connected to the steering linkage. Could I remove it from the steering linkage as well, or just from the frame?
Correct, and I suggest also removing the steering linkage before you try to remove the idler arm. That way you can move the idler arm into position where you can get your wrench in and get more clearance.
Okay, and I need a pickle fork to remove the idler arm.
That's correct.
Okay, now we've already removed the pitman arm from the steering gearbox. Is there anything difficult about removing that pitman arm?
No, actually just making sure you get the right position. For this particular vehicle, the way the header style was, we actually had to turn the steering wheel until we got the pitman arm lined up and take a bar and drove from the top down through the engine compartment to get it off.
Okay, so the pitman arm sitting up on the gearbox like that, and you put your rod through and you knocked it down from the top.
That's correct.
And knocked it loose. And otherwise, if it had regular manifolds on it, you'd probably used a puller tool like this.
That's correct.
Okay. And pull this pitman arm off so that it's completely off the assembly. Once this is unbolted, these bolts and your steering rag joints removed, you can lift the steering gearbox up out of the engine bay. Now, alternatively, if you're removing everything at one time and your exhaust is out of the way, once these are loosened, you can just pull the steering gearbox aside and it will drop with the rest of the assembly.
Before you unbolt your steering box, you want to go ahead and loosen your rad coupler joint. Take your pickle fork and just slide it back. Just work it a little bit. It's been on there for 37 years. It takes a little bit to get it off. And then from there, we went down and I got this bolt from the top of the motor. It was easier to get it that direction. Plus, while you're on top, because these actually have a head on the other side that sits in the frame in these square holes. So you have to hold it with your left hand and turn the wrench with your right hand if you're doing it by yourself. And you can reach both of those from the top because your fender well is right here and keeps it separate from the two outer bolts.
Okay.
So then when I came down underneath the car to get the other two bolts, I pulled the bottom out first because it gives you more wrench clearance when you get to the second bolt. So this is the last bolt I'm going to pull out.
What's left at this point to drop the stock steering out of the vehicle?
Well, we just have to pull our ram cylinder bracket off the frame here. It's 4 half-inch nuts, usually on a ratchet with an extension. It's no problem, it just drops right on off.
And if we weren't dropping the entire system, could you remove the hydraulic ram without taking that bracket off the frame?
Yes, Chris, we could. Just simply pull the cotter pin right here, as you see. Back that castle nut off and it'll come right on out.
Once these items are removed, your system's ready to come out of the vehicle. Of course, we can't forget the actual power steering hoses. You do have a power steering hose on the back of the power steering pump. If the engine was in here, my hand, maybe right about here is about where your power steering pump would be. So you would need to remove those hoses. You'll have your pressure line and your return line. And all of that assembly then can come out of the vehicle. Okay guys, we now have the stock steering system completely off the vehicle, laid out here on the ground. A couple of new parts to compare to, but I want to ask Danny a couple questions. What kind of wear items and issues do you see with the stock?